I'm John Beaudin. We're up to our entire interview with Brian Coombes, who has a brand new project. And man, this is adventurous. And for any Prog fan, like just wow. Circus of Wire Dolls is the name of this long, brilliant album. For Small Creeps Day fans, Mike Rutherford's first solo album from 1980, Noel McCalla is on this album. And he's worked with the originator of this, Brian Coombes, quite a few times. Chris Difford of Squeeze is also on this project, and a lot of special guests we'll talk about on this interview with Brian Coombes, talking about every song from Circus of Wire Dolls on Rock History Book. Hey man, great. By the way, what before we get going, so they re-released Small Creeps Day, and they didn't really do anything to it.
They did nothing to it. Yeah, no, I know. I had thought about throwing my hat into the ring about doing a remix, remaster, or something, but I would just lose that competition to Steven Wilson or somebody else who does that. But I would do it lovingly, But it doesn't seem like Mike is all that interested in that record.
No, it hasn't changed. I've talked to people who have talked to him, and he's really the only person from the project that I haven't talked to. But yeah, everyone says the same thing. He like a very short answer concerning it. Well, yeah, I'm not. Well, some maybe someday, that kind of stuff. So, okay. Hey,
yeah, and I don't understand it. It's like a lot of us think that's the best Genesis solo record. So I can see why he might want to distance himself from Acting Very Strange, right? Which was an experiment for him and him singing lead vocals. But Small Creeps Day is so beautiful.
Steve Hackett, I asked him what's the best solo album. He said easily Small Creeps Day.
Yeah, easily.
Yeah. Okay. The new album, I know the premise of it. I know why you did it, but I'm going to ask you to explain. How did this come to fruition, first of all?
Well, I had the concept. I've had the concept for years and years. Circus of Wire Dolls, basically inspired by a scene in a Thomas Wolfe novel from 1940, my favorite novel, called You Can't Go Home Again. And I just found that scene in the novel comic, but yet profound. So I always had it in mind that we were going to do at least a song called Circus of Wire Dolls. And after the Aunt Phillips tribute shows in 2019, we came back home, and it was Christmas season and everybody was tired. So I started sketching out a couple of song ideas. And one of them was going to be the Circus of Wire Dolls song. And then, right, so this was January 2020 when we got rolling on that. And we all know what happened a couple months later. So with too much time on our hands, what started off as being a one or two song, like little mini suite, ended up being a much larger project. But it was only 6 months, 9 months after that, where I started writing a song called Trapeze Waltz. And it was the first song on the record where we actually I envisioned it as two characters on stage singing to an audience during the verses and singing to each other on the choruses. And it was at that point that we decided, or not really decided, because it just kind of happened on its own. We resolved ourselves to the fate that we were doing this rock opera musical. And it was at that point where we started, talking about who was going to voice different characters.
Very Alan Parsons project in some ways. And by the way, don't tell me, hold on. Oh yeah, Justin Cohn. He's got kind of a Chris Rainbow, almost David Gates, how he sings.
Really nice combination. I love his voice.
Yeah, I love his voice as well. Justin came in here to the studio years and years ago as a singer songwriter, and we did his first record. That was kind of the first time all of the members that would become Rocking Horse Music Club were together, and Justin was kind of the final piece. But we all played on that record. Yeah, David Gates we hear a lot, and we also hear Christopher Cross is another reference that we get. But I'm very, very fortunate that I get to work with Justin and Pat Gochez, who I think is got a wonderful rock and roll voice. And I am a bit sheepish that on the album, the first voice that you actually hear is mine, right? So I'm on a record with Justin and Pat, and then Noel McCalla and Chris Difford and Tim Bonas and all these wonderful voices. And yet the first and last voice that you hear on the record is little old me.
Well, speaking of starting, I like the way, Prologue Riverside starts off. I mean, it's got this sense, it has to start like that to me. It has a sense of mystery, and you build and build. Tell me about putting that one together.
Yeah, that was awfully fun. All the sound effects that you hear were captured on my iPhone, and it ranges from my neighbor's dog barking at me when I'm on my morning walk to quiet mornings, different times of the season with different birds chirping on my walks. And then Big Ben, my wife and I were in England kind of on the last day that Big Ben was chiming before it went down for construction. So we filmed that. So I had Big Ben. There's another church bell that's from Salisbury Cathedral in England while we were on our first trip to England as Rocking Horse Music Club. There were a couple, I grew up with that type of thing, right? And I actually just listened to two examples similar to that. The first track on Roger Hodgson's first solo record, right? In the Eye of the Storm.
Yeah.
It starts with that sound montage. And then Alan Parsons, right? The first song on Vulture Culture starts with that sound montage. That's Let's Talk About Me. So it's in that spirit. It's the soundscape that is really supposed to set the mood. And really what it's doing, it's saying that life goes on even though the character singing that song has just passed away, right? We've all been there. We've all lost loved ones. And, I notice that whenever the Northeast weather knocks out our power, right? And it disrupts our lives. But if you haven't lost your power, life goes on as normal. Right? It's the same thing when there are hurricanes in Florida. Those people's lives have been completely changed. But for the rest of us, our life goes on. So that's kind of what that's supposed to symbolize, because my character is actually singing from the grave on that opening tune.
The Circus of Wire Dolls. Now, was that the actual song you said that you started with?
Yes, but not. It ended up being the verses of Circus of Wire Dolls, but it was attached to another song that didn't end up making the record, but two of the parts did.
I listen to that. I'm going, hey, there's the prog. Mind you, the beginning's very proggy too, of course, because prog music does that quite a bit.
Yeah. So the opening riff of the title track, Circus of Wire Dolls, that's a riff that I wrote in my friend John Beaudin's basement in Hudson, New Hampshire in 1984. So somewhere we have a cassette, and it's probably in my attic. We have a cassette of John Beaudin, Mike Stone, and I jamming. I didn't have any of the rest of it. I just had the opening riff, and we probably played that for an hour and probably annoyed the heck out of his parents.
That's
but
amazing.
it goes back that far.
And you don't wait long to get to Noel. What an expressive, interesting, just beautiful singer he is. Packed up. I can never listen to that man enough. I just love he's like easily one of my favorite vocalists of all time.
Well, you know, the song that the song on the record that he really brought to life, pardon the pun, because it's actually the song where he's talking about all of the characters in the circus coming to life, is a song called Animate in 5/8, which is again a tip of the cap to, you know, that section of Supper's Ready, right, where it's the 9/8 section, right? So for us, it was Animate in 5/8.
Gorgeous song, by the way. Gorgeous song.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. So when we wrote that, I did a guide vocal, and then Pat Goches did a guide vocal. And when we tracked the drums, Eric Wagley, who is kind of my, you know, obviously Justin and Pat are kind of my creative songwriter collaborators. But Eric, the drummer, I mean, you know, drummers, they're the king of the ship. You know what I mean? We as songwriters can think that we're in charge, but when you go out and actually play this stuff, it all comes down to the drummer. So Eric is the one that I really rely on for reality checks, especially on business issues. Anyway, he did not like the melody line at all. He thought it was stiff and mechanical. And I kept saying, well, wait until Noel does it. Wait till Noel does it. Wait till Noel does it. And that's one of the vocals that Noel did for us at Abbey Road last December. It's coming up on a year now. And
we're still talking about Animate in 5/8, right?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. And when we came back from Abbey Road with the vocal, it became one of Eric's favorite songs because Noel just added so much soul to it that he's singing our melody, but man, just the amount of humanity that he presents to the track, he pushed it over the top.
Putting a project like this, isn't it an arduous task for you? Or do you just, like, I remember asking Alan Parsons for, like, in Sirius, I said, well, how difficult was it to put this song together? He said, well, one piece at a time, you just keep layering. And he says, you know, you put all your energy in that song and, oh, look, we came up with another song. There's 2 songs now. What was it like putting this, sequencing this and putting this project together?
I had a blast. And again, because of COVID, we had planned on having a record out and being back doing shows in England in the autumn of 2020. So, you know, when that was taken off the board, there was no pressure. I mean, luckily, Rocking Horse Studio stayed busy through the entire pandemic. But we did have a little bit more time than we would have had under ordinary circumstances. So I just enjoyed it. And we explored so many different ideas and so many different genres that, you know, like I would say to Pat, hey, you know, we need something for this character. What if we do it as a glam rock tune, right? So I went away and wrote.
Hey, wait a minute. Yeah. You're talking about It's Not About You.
It's Not About You.
Yeah. That is talk about sequencing. Brian, you put that in. It was just perfect. I went, oh my God, they're going glammy. You know, it's saucy. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you know, my contributions musically to that song were very Roxy Music. And Pat's contributions were very T-Rex. And then that whole bridge section where it goes to the piano is like, that was us paying tribute to Queen on that. So
I smiled all the way through it. So mission accomplished. It was great.
Excellent. Now, you know, it remains to be seen, right? Reviews of the record have been really good so far, and we're blessed with that. And it's always humbling that, you know, anybody would take the time to, it's a 95-minute record. You know, I sent it to you, you know, it's a long record. So it's always humbling that somebody would take the time to listen to it and put their thoughts together on it, right? So we kind of knew, all right, hey, look, it's not a traditional Prog album. Yeah, there are sections in 5/8 and 9/8, and there are long songs, but there are pretty piano ballads like Flowers in November and glam rock tunes and jazz fusion tunes. And, one reviewer said that mashing up all those genres actually made the record more progressive. So that was a reviewer that understood it. And then there was one reviewer that was on he wrote for more of a rock magazine, not a prog rock, but more of a rock magazine. And he loved all the rock elements, but he didn't like the music theater elements. And, fair enough. I mean, it was a great review and it was well thought out. And he premised it about saying, hey, look, I don't like musical theater. So I wasn't going to like these, and I don't like these. But yet, even in his critique, he compared us to Andrew Lloyd Webber and compared us to Les Mis. So I'll take that.
Yeah, and I like one of the reasons I've always liked Toto is because the singers they're piggybacking off each other. There's duets and sometimes three singers, which you do. A lot of people singing back and forth on this, and I see. Speaking of those kind of tunes, I love that a lot. Always have.
Me too. I mean, I like growing up, right? There was more of that back then, right? I mean, you listen to John Lennon sing a Beatles song and you say, "Ooh, yeah, there's the voice of the Beatles." And then you hear Paul and you say, "Wait, that's the voice of the Beatles." And then a third voice enters and it's George. And then it's Ringo, right? And the same thing, Pink Floyd is another case, right?
Yeah.
Waters and Gilmore, but then Rick Wright comes in and you say, "Wait, that's the real voice of Pink Floyd."
The Eagles, another good example of
the Eagles. One of my favorite bands, the Cars, right? Rick Ocasek was the voice of the Cars. No, wait, Ben Orr was the voice of the Cars. Fleetwood Mac, Tears for Fears, right? But that doesn't seem like, I don't know if like the industry says that that's not marketable now, right? Because you need to have the identity of the front person. I don't know, but I do know, I've said when we work with younger singer-songwriters here at the studio, I always tell them, whatever you do, don't do what I have done with Rocking Horse Music Club, right? When you think about how off-brand everything that we've done, our first single was a gospel song. We had never written a gospel song before. And then we did the EP, but then our follow-up to that was a tribute to Anthony Phillips. And then we followed that up with a 22-song rock opera. So that's what I tell young people, don't do that. You've got to be a little bit smarter about the image. But, we are what we are, and we're just doing this as the English would say, it's a busman's holiday. We're just having fun.
Senseless Sky, love that energy. Good tune.
Yeah, that one was a cool one. I actually wrote a lot of that right on the computer, drawing in the MIDI. So I didn't actually play those horn lines. Humans did, but when I wrote it, I heard it in my head and drew it into the sequencer in Pro Tools. And then it was in 7/8, and we had Kenwood Denard here working on a record of his own that we're still working on. And, I said to Kenwood, I said, "Hey, you're all set up." We finished early that day. So I said, "Ken, can you just give me a groove in 7/8?" I didn't even play him the tune. I just gave him a click track and said, "Hey, play a groove in 7/8." And Kenwood did, a Brand X type of drum part. And he was wild and energetic and all over the place. And then we had Eric come in and lay down a more solid groove. So it's Eric with the solid groove and Kenwood just going crazy over the top.
To reach the other side, soaring vocals, which I love. Lovely tune. Tell me about that one.
Yeah, so that came mid time on the record, where most of the songs, I don't play guitar, so everything that I was doing was on piano or synths. And it got to the point where the record was feeling really keyboard heavy. So I put out a message to the guitar player team on the project saying, do you, hey, if you guys have any piano guitar bits that you're not using, that you'd like to contribute to the project, can you send them my way? And let's see if we can, get some more guitar presence on the record. So that was a song that Pat had. He didn't like his melody line because he thought it sounded too Radiohead. So he gave me his chord progression and said, Brian, I'm not even going to show you my melody line. Can you come up with something? So I came up with something, not being a huge Radiohead fan. It's a band that I respect, but I'm just not, it never really came into my sphere. But apparently it came into my sphere enough that when I started showing it to people, they'd say, oh, that sounds like Radiohead. So, and then, then we got Justin to sing it and it soared even higher, right? So Justin on that one, he sings the first part and then Pat sings the second part.
So I wasn't familiar with, it's Caroline Carter, right? Caroline?
Caroline. Yes.
Caroline. I looked her up. Obviously she's gorgeous, but man, what a voice. Will You Be My Downfall? Another one of those back and forth. Yes, I'll Be Your Downfall. Tell me about that one.
Yeah. So Will You Be My Downfall was really important to the story arc of the Tightrope Walker, right? Because the Tightrope Walker had just sung the previous song, To Reach the Other Side, which is basically saying, the kind of a existential hero type of thing where he's basically saying we walk on a tightrope from birth to death, and it's a straight line. And if we deviate from that straight line, there's danger on either side. So he, as his role as a tightrope walker, that's what he does every day, is he walks from one end of the rope to the other. But then one night he discovers, he finds himself looking down at the beautiful prima donna. And they both contemplate getting into a relationship they know they should not be in, but they know they're going to do it anyway. So Will You Be My Downfall isn't as much a question as it is a request, a plea. They both know they're going to do it. So, that was one that Pat and I started the verses, and we knew it was going to be a back and forth duet song, the two of them. But then I didn't like what I had written for the bridge. So I played it for Caroline and she says, can I take it home with me? And then she came in a couple of days later and she had a nice new melody line. And then we sat in this room together and we wrote the lyrics together on that bridge. And it's cool because in that bridge, like each of them ends up trying to convince the other that this is a good idea or a bad idea. And right, like at one point she's saying just one step. So she's telling him to take that last step. And then he says just one more breath because she's a singer. So she's breathing. So I was really, really, really pleased with that. And Caroline, we had done a record with Caroline a couple of years ago, which is really a really cool indie synth pop record. And Caroline is remarkably talented at everything she does, right? She's in graduate school now, and no matter what she does, she's a success at it. And from what I understand, she actually won the talent competition at Miss America the year that she was there.
No kidding.
As a vocalist. Yeah. Yeah.
So little left, Tim Bonus, nice ballad. We talked about him briefly a while ago. Tell me about that one.
Yeah. So fun story with Tim and that. That was supposed to be "Will You Be My Downfall." So we sent that song to Tim. Well, I had reached out to Tim, a lot, much sooner than that, and said, "Hey, look, we're doing this rock opera. It's kind of crazy. I know you're busy. What do you think? Would you be interested in singing a song on this?" And he said, "Yeah, it sounds interesting." Um, so then we sent him that track with a melody line and lyrics for the song "Will You Be My Downfall?" And he wrote me back saying, "Hey, I wrote a different melody line that didn't fit with your lyrics. So, what do you think of this?" And unfortunately, his lyric was not "Will You Be My Downfall?", which we needed for the narration to progress that character arc. So now we had this really pretty song, but we didn't know who was going to actually be singing it in the story, right? I mean, Tim was the vocalist, but what was the character? So that's another kind of nihilistic existential thing where, um, it's basically saying it doesn't really matter, right? We're going to live our lives and we're going to die. And so I came up with the idea of a roustabout, right? Just a manual laborer in the circus who looks at everything that's going on and seeing everybody else in the limelight. And this is a person who toiled for the love of the circus and never got any fame out of it. And I thought, "Oh, that's a good character to sing So Little Left." So the only thing that remained, it's my melody line on the chorus and a couple of lyrics on the chorus from the original version, but the rest of it was Tim. And then we had to go and write "Will You Be My Downfall?" So we got an extra song out of it.
That's pretty cool. Trapeze Waltz, Amy Burke's duet. Tell me about that.
Yeah. So I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how familiar you are with Amy Burks,
Not
but
at all.
yeah. So she's an English singer songwriter, and one of my English friends, just sent me a link like years ago, saying, "Hey, Brian, I know you like theatrical type of stuff and proggy stuff and female vocal stuff. You should check out Amy Burks." So I became an Amy Burks fan years ago. And with Trapeze Waltz, again, that being the first song that we did that, okay, this is a rock opera now. So we were going to have two separate, we were going to have a male and a female. And Justin cut what was supposed to be just a guide vocal for the male part, but it was so good. It was so good that I but it was supposed to be a different character, right? Justin's character is the star of the show. So, but the idea of ditching Justin's vocal just for that pedantic reason, I said, "Hey, no, we're the ones creating this. So if we want Justin to sing it," so he's voicing the role of the king of the flying trapeze. We reached out to Amy. She was the only person that I really wanted to have sing that role. And, she agreed to do it. And not only did she, do the lead vocal, she did the harmonies, and then she did that little outro backing vocal part that is so incredibly Kate Bush and so cool. So, we did that remotely. She did that in her home studio and then sent it. But then when we were at Abbey Road last December, there were a couple of background vocal parts. So I asked Amy, I said, "Hey, I know it might be kind of a long hike for you, but we're going to be at Abbey Road." She joined us at Abbey Road and did some background vocals on other tunes as well. So, and then Amy is going to be joining us for the live shows that we do in England in March.
Cool.
Yeah.
The one of the best vocals on the album in Burn when Caroline, oh my God, on that chorus, I got goosebumps. I went, holy snapping turtles. Wow.
Yeah, she totally soars. Yeah, she soars. And you know, that's another one where I had some lyrics and I had a melody. You know, I had the whole chord progression. And I said to her, I said, look, I don't really like my melody and I don't really like my lyric. And that was another one she took home and came back just a couple of days later and laid it all on me. So that's all her, and it's absolutely brilliant. Um, and you know that main riff, that main piano riff, again that's been around for 10 or 15 years. But that song was laying in the might not make it pile for a long time until Caroline knocked it into the first class.
Cut from a different cloth. Chris is, he's singing like it's like that whiskey soaked oldest man in the world. Like, wow, that is well done.
Yeah, so that's the very last song to make the record. Burn and Cut from a Different Cloth. Pat and I wrote that with a local singer-songwriter here in New Hampshire. His name is Dusty Gray, and that's his real name. Dusty had moved to Nashville. He had a publishing deal, and he's had a couple of tracks cut, national, major label type stuff. So he's a really talented guy. And, unlike Tim, who didn't do his homework or didn't follow instructions, I had talked to Dusty and said that we were going to write a song about the oldest man alive and that these characters were made of cloth. So the day of writing, Dusty and Pat and I got together, and Dusty came in and he said, "Hey, Brian, I've got a title, Cut from a Different Cloth." And I thought, yeah, it's cool. It's kind of common. But then I thought, well, wait a minute. The person singing this is actually made of cloth. So Dusty had kind of flipped the cliche on its head, right? And then Dusty also came up with one of my favorite lines in the song. Back then we were made not to fray, which I think is a great, great line. So we demoed it, and it was in 6/8, and it was kind of like a country rock song, right? And then we left it in the to work on pile. And again, it got to the end of the process where Josh Kimball, who works with me here at the studio and co-produced the record with me, we were listening through the songs that had yet to be finished. And, we came across the Dusty song, as we called it. And I said, this song is so good. The lyric is good. The melody's good, but it really doesn't fit. So I mentioned that to Pat, and Pat said, well, Brian, let me take it home. And that same night, he sent me a demo that he had done at home. He lowered the pitch and he slowed the tempo, and he made the character more tired. The demo that we did with Dusty had the character more angry. Like, hey, wait a minute, guys. I'm not just an old man. And he was angry about it. Pat's interpretation was, I'm an old man. I'm tired. Tell me what you need from me. I'll do it. Right. And when we lowered the pitch, Pat was the only one who could sing it in that register. So I went to England to speak with Chris Topham at Plain Groovy, the label that put out the record. And I went in April and I played him a complete version of the song that we had done with Pat's vocal. And I said, wouldn't Chris Difford sound fantastic singing this song? Knowing that Chris Topham knew Chris Difford. And I don't know if you know, but Chris Difford had sung on a record that my wife and I did 20 years ago. My wife and I we had a project called Waking in the Blue. And Chris sang on a song called Two that was written by a guitar player named Mike McAdam, who was in my old band Tristan Park, was in Waking in the Blue with Michelle and me. and now is in Rock and Horse Music Club. So there was some history there. But when I said to Chris Topham, wouldn't Chris Difford sound great? I didn't think anything was going to come of it. I knew that Squeeze was touring. I knew that Chris was doing some solo shows. I didn't think anything was going to come of it. And a couple of days later, I got an email from Chris Difford saying, "Hey, Brian, it's, great to be back in touch with you. Chris Topham sent me the song. I think it's really great. I think I could do a nice job singing it. If you're interested, let me know." So that's how that came about. And Chris was fantastic. The vocal again, he really captured what I was trying to convey about a character who's just tired and old. Yeah. And yeah, isn't it smoky? I mean, it's Lou Reed, it's Leonard Cohen, it's, all of these things. And yet it's identifiably Chris Difford as well.
Yeah. By the time I got to Face of Rain, when we were talking about Justin, that's when I made the connection for me. I'm going, that's what it is. It's David Gates. No, it's Chris Rainbow from the, and by then because I'd started recognizing his voice and going, yes. Tell me about Face of Rain.
Yeah. So Face of Rain, I wrote that one. That's a solo, Brian Coombes composition. That was at that point where I was concerned that too many of the songs were keyboard driven. We had cut a version with me playing the CP70 electric piano. So it sounded very Peter Gabriel, In Your Eyes type of vibe, right? And then Josh and Pat both kind of pushed it. Like, it was Pat who said, well, what if we did a bunch of acoustic guitars and made it sound like a little bit more like the Flaming Lips? So I was game for them. Pat and Josh actually did a lot of the guitars without me around. And, when I heard it, I was like, yeah, that's exactly, we wanted to take it in a different direction. And then, lyrically, it's two concepts. There's one thing that I always think about whenever I travel, but it doesn't necessarily even need to be travel, but we never know in our lives when we're doing something for the last time, right? And I think that whenever I go to England, right, when I always leave that last day and I walk around to my favorite spots in London, if it's London, and I think this could be the last time I'm ever here, right? But we never know it at the time. The last time, you kiss a loved one, hug someone, see something, say something, you never know. So it's kind of a carpe diem, live in the moment. And we combine that feeling with, on the chorus, it's something that I think every artist deals with. It's slight imposter syndrome, right? Is what I have done any good? Is it good? Have I fooled people into thinking it's good? Do I think it's good? Right? So, and I imagine everybody who creates anything wonders if it's any good. So those are the two concepts in Face of Rain. Maybe I should have had those as separate songs, but it is what it is. We're covering both of those topics in the one.
Elderly folks were basically saying their best years were their 20. We'll come back to it in a sec. 20s and their 30s. Bill Bruford told me, he says his best decade was his 60s. He says, I love in my 60s. He says, I don't know. I was just comfortable. I was well seated in this machine, right? By the way, with you, I've got a whole series. I've asked about 30 people and everyone's answered it. So you have to answer. Where do we go when we die?
Wow. Well, we contemplate that on the very last song on the record, where I ask, is it a sleep of silence or, a sleep of sorrow or a silent sleep of silence? I have no idea. I'd like to think that we carry on in another dimension, and whether that's, traditional heaven or, floating around as the Force. I'd like to think that it's not just the end.
0300. Beautiful tune. Beautiful.
Thank you. That was actually the very first song when I told you at the beginning of our discussion. That was the first song that I wrote. Literally after coming back from the Ant shows in England, turning on the studio again for the first time. Sat at the piano, wrote that song. Intended, on our previous record, I would have just left it alone and just sent it to Justin and said, "Hey, sing something over this." But in this case, I sang it, wrote it. It happened very quickly. But then Justin's vocal again took it to a whole nother level. My favorite Justin moment on the record, when he sings the very last line, that was an improv for him. He sings the line and then he sings it again with this utter sorrow. And it's always 3 a.m. is the line that he sings. That's basically my song about anxiety and insomnia and being a prisoner to both of those afflictions. Autobiographical to some degree. Part of it is inspired by F. Scott Fitzgerald. He wrote an essay called "The Crack Up" that Hemingway ridiculed him for, saying, real men don't admit to having mental illnesses, because Hemingway was manly man and Fitzgerald was a more delicate soul.
Yeah, but Hemingway had some scruples. He had a lot of he medicated well.
Yeah, and the way his life ended, right? Maybe it would have been a good thing for him to talk about his anxieties, right? So
instead of doing something that made it worse,
yeah, that's right. So, and then again, the idea was to have it be. It was very conscious to have it be a dream pop type of arrangement. So we got Michaela Davis from upstate New York to play the harp on it. And if you're not familiar with Michaela Davis, she's an amazing artist, singer, songwriter herself. And it was very intentional to make it a dream pop song about insomnia. So there's atmospheric keyboards and Michaela's harp, and then kind of a hypnotic electronic drum thing, and Justin's just beautiful vocal. So that's 0300.
This album works on many levels, and you just kind of articulated it again, the fact that you have a sense of celebrating the people who work with you. You have there's a sense of family to this. I can tell by the way you talk about the project, but also the appreciative level that you have towards anyone who's touched big or small. I mean, it's like a celebration, cliche as it sounds.
Yeah, that's right. And, that's very real. I am a musician of limited capacity myself. So I've always relied on that feeling of, the old adage of you don't want to be the best person, in the band, right? So I've always surrounded myself with musicians who are better than I am. I never want to be the best musician in a band, I can tell you that. But I also really genuinely enjoy the collaborative experience. And I think that comes from me producing artists here in the studio, right? And Dusty Gray is an example. We've recorded his records for years, and he comes from a wildly different musical background than me. But yet I respect and appreciate Dusty as an artist so much that when we go to lunch, we'll have conversations about, well, what are your influences? What are your influences? And I thought that I was a knowledgeable music person when I first opened the studio. How ignorant I was, because I didn't know anything, right? So I learn and I take away. I've become a huge Taylor Swift fan because I work with so many young women singer-songwriters. I think Taylor Swift is great. And, it's funny, Tim Bonus and I had a conversation at Abbey Road about Taylor Swift where he agreed with me that she is great. But, again, younger prog rock Brian never would have admitted to being a Taylor Swift fan or a Guy Clark fan or a John Prine fan, or if it was Southern rock, that was too hillbilly for Brian. It all had to be, upscale English, la-di-da, right? I mean, because I was listening to Syd Barrett and The Lamb Lies Down on Broadway. I didn't have time for Neil Young, right? That was short-sighted of me as a younger man. But again, now in my 50s, I'm realizing, hey, there's more to it. But yet, I would share, right? We work with there was a guy named Tristan Oman, a local guy here, brilliant songwriter, huge Guy Clark fan. I turned him on to Nick Drake, right? Because Nick Drake wasn't on his radar because he was this obscure English guy.
Yeah, who didn't sell at the time at all and eventually
exactly.
killed himself. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, it's that cross-pollination. I love and celebrate the collaborative effort, and I love everybody that contributed to this record. They made it what it was. I might have been the driving force, but you and I probably wouldn't be talking about it, and I wouldn't be talking about the record as I'm really proud of the record, and I'm a fan of the people who contributed to the record.
Is it SY22, SY22? What is that?
SY22. And I can thank or blame Josh Kimball for the title. SY22 is a Yamaha synthesizer, and it is the synthesizer that just happened to be up on a stand here in the control room when I came up with the chord progression. And so it was labeled in our computer system as, well, I don't know what to call this song, so it's SY22. And it was Josh who said, I think you should leave it as SY22, Brian, because that'll be more mysterious.
Keep them guessing. Lost a Piece of Me. Oh, none of us have ever done that. Tell me about that song.
Yeah, so Lost a Piece of Me originally was a full 4-minute song that had verse, chorus. And late in the process, again, I said to Justin and Pat, the only part that I liked was that chorus, and so that's the part we kept. And it's a vocal round, and it has Justin, Pat, me, Michelle, and Evelyn Cormier are all the vocals on that, and we go round and round on that round, and it's all about. That was I wrote that about losing my dad.
Okay. House Party at Jack's. It's Alan Parsons-ish to me. There's a lot going on. There's lots going on, literally, in that song. Tell me about that.
Yeah, that's the one that the prog rock people, if they mention it at all, don't like it. Yeah. It's pretty simple. The main riff in that is the same riff from Circus of Wire Dolls, except it's in 4/4 instead of 7/8. So because it was in 4/4, it felt dancey to me because we were thinking about making the main riff in 4/4, and I just couldn't get my head around it. Like I had mentioned to you, I wrote that riff in 1984. Mm-hmm. So the idea of like making it in 4/4, so it was basically a spoof for me. And House Party at Jack's, again, Thomas Wolfe, the section of the novel You Can't Go Home Again that talks about the Circus of Wire Dolls is a chapter or a section called Party at Jack's. So we just stuck the house party because it has weird synths and drum machines. And then it's just a bunch of voices, and all those voices are me, basically kind of taking shots at the pedanticness of progressive rock fans, right? Like, oh, well, my favorite period of Genesis is, right? Or who do you like better, Alan White or Bill Bruford, Phil Collins or Peter Gabriel? And that was the one. I actually prefer after Peter Gabriel left, but it changed after Steve Hackett left, right? So it's me whispering all those cliches that prog rock fans like to talk about. So far, I haven't been caught. Nobody's caught me on that.
Flowers in November. So it's Patrick Gochez.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay. Lead vocals, pretty song. Love that. Tell me about that one.
That's my favorite lyric on the record. And that's another song that Pat had done a version. He had written that song. So that's musically, that's all his. And melodically, that's all his. But he didn't like the lyric that he had. So he said, "Hey, Brian, I'm not going to use this song for anything. Can it fit on the record? Do you want that?" And so when he sent it, I very, very quickly wrote a new lyric. And it's my favorite lyric. Really, it talks about a love affair and how love can still blossom late in life. And it's the song that makes my wife tear up whenever she hears it. And that was inspired by, I was in London recording the choir for our debut single back in 2018. And I was walking through Hyde Park and came to the Rose Garden at the corner there of Hyde Park and Marble Arch. And I was surprised that the roses were still in bloom. So I took a picture of it and wrote Flowers in November in my journal. And years later, came to be on the record. It's kind of a combination lyrically of an American short story novelist, Sherwood Anderson, and Waterloo Sunset are kind of the feels that I was going for on that song. But like you say, that was one that we sent. That was another song that we had sent to Tim Bonas to say, "Hey, would you be interested in singing this?" And he very quickly said, "Hey, Brian, I'd love to work on the record with you, but I couldn't do that song justice as well as Pat did." So the vocal that you hear is the demo vocal that Pat and I recorded to send to Tim. And Kate St. John from Dream Academy plays the cor anglais. So the English horn is a really mournful woodwind instrument. It kind of rivals to me the cello as far as songs that can be mournful and expressive.
Noel McCalla, Every Show Must End, with Justin. Tell me about that one. God, love that.
So yeah,
Love
that's the big the big rock tune. And at the story, that's basically saying the artist is saying, "That's it, I'm done, no regrets, but I'm moving on to something else in life." That's another song that came out of my call for guitar songs. And our lead guitarist, Myron Kibbe, who's been working with me since I opened the studio back in 2007, that was his contribution. He wrote that musically and melodically. He didn't sing it, but he sent the lead vocal melody played on guitar. And then I wrote the lyric, and then Justin came up with that kind of cool middle section. So it was supposed to be a big climax moment in the record. And again, Noel sounds great, Justin sounds great. They go back and forth. Their characters are alter egos of each other. So that's kind of what's happening there. When something happens to one, it also happens to the other.
You're a Florence and the Machine singer, Evelyn Cormier. I love that woman's voice. All Shall Be Well. Man, I could listen to her for many, many years, and hopefully I will. American Idol, yes. And by the way, how'd you hook up with her? You told me before, but how did you hook up with her?
Yeah, she's local to us.
Okay.
So she's she's in New Hampshire. She's a New Hampshire singer-songwriter, and we're kind of the place to go if you're a singer-songwriter. You come to Rocking Horse. So it was only a matter of time. We were social media friends, liking each other's posts. So and eventually it came to her coming down, and it was right. The first time she came here was right before she left to do American Idol. She she had passed certain levels and was going off to LA.
Right.
And we recorded her. The first song we did with her was right before she left for LA for that. So Evelyn is, she's one of my favorite people to work with in the studio. I always say that there are three people who I have witnessed here in this building perform a one-take perfect vocal. Evelyn is one of them.
Wow.
Yeah. So, usually we mere mortals have to record more than one take, right? So we got set up. Evelyn blasted out, and this was on her material. She blasted out a great vocal. And then Josh and I looked at each other and said, well, I guess we should get another one because that's what we do, but we didn't need it. So Evelyn has got, amazing pitch, and she's got amazing control. I think I might have mentioned she doesn't fit the mold of what you would think of for an American Idol singer, right? You think Kelly Clarkson and Carrie Underwood and big belters.
Yeah.
And Evelyn is more introspective and certainly not a belter. But her warm timbre, her delivery. So she's singing All Shall Be Well. That's a mother singing to a young child to comfort them in times of trouble.
She sings like she's 1,000 years old.
Yeah, she's an old soul for a 21-year-old woman. And we just did a radio show a month back, a live in studio radio show. And she came along and sang All Shall Be Well. And she also helped me with a ton of the background vocal parts. So she's, I know it sounds cliche, but we are a family here at Rocking Horse. And that's, Caroline, and that's Evelyn, and, just the group of people that we work with. We're so blessed, and it really feels good. Evelyn and Caroline both came with us to England in 2019 for the Aunt Phillips tribute shows. And I'm hoping both of them will come with us in March for these shows.
Who are the other two perfect vocals?
Both women, incidentally. I mean, I'm sure there are men who have perfect vocals, but both of them were women. So, and they're just local people that you wouldn't expect, such perfection. So Ashley Howard White is one of them. Okay. And Delaney Pickering is another. Delaney Pickering, an amazing blues guitarist. And she had a reputation of being a blues guitarist. So we were not prepared for her to come in and be such an amazing vocalist because she was an amazing guitarist. It's not fair that some people have that much talent. But yeah, so those are the three people that we have witnessed with perfect vocal takes.
Well, if we can get a few people just looking them up, right, our job is done. There you go.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right.
Circus Waltz with David Cross. What a journey that song is.
Yeah, and thank you. That it was indeed supposed to convey a sense that time is passing and our characters are getting older. And yeah, so that the soloists, I think in order from start to finish, it starts with the only keyboard solo that you're ever going to hear from me. And it was very composed. I am definitely not an improv guy, but I will tell you that I didn't cheat. I actually performed that keyboard solo. And then from there, does it go into, I'm trying to remember the sequence. I think it goes into Rob Townsend's soprano saxophone, and then David Cross, his electric violin, and then John and Julie Finn, other members of the team, do kind of a harmonized guitar solo. So David Cross, my two favorite, what I like about King Crimson maybe isn't what King Crimson is known for. I like the delicate moments, the quiet, contemplative moments. And the two musicians who I thought always brought that were Ian MacDonald and David Cross. So I'm fortunate enough to have worked with both, because we had talked earlier about the record that my wife and I had done, Waking in the Blue. Ian MacDonald flew up from New York to New Hampshire to record with us for a weekend for that. And of course, he's passed away now, but Ian McDonald, probably, one of my favorite musicians ever. And then David Cross was an absolute gentleman. I sent him the track, and I reached out. It was a cold call. It wasn't friend of a friend. It was a cold call email, and he got back to me and said, "Yeah, it sounds like an interesting project. Can you send me the track?" Sent him the track. He says, "Yeah, I can play on this." And a week later, he sent back his violin parts, and um, again, just the idea that somebody like David Cross is playing on the record, I'm always humbled by that.
Let's talk about the last track, Coda, Slide Down the Cellar Door.
Yeah, so Coda was actually, two pieces. So we, as we're rehearsing for this live now, we call it Coda 1 and Coda 2. Coda 1 was very, very much influenced by Small Creeps Day, that first section. Kind of at the end of the day type of vibe. And, that's again, Noel and Justin singing in octaves, which again is kind of the first time that they're really singing together, and they're singing the same melody an octave apart, which kind of brings us to the close of, they're not only were their lives intertwined, they were actually one and the same. So that runs its course as a really beautiful Myron Kibbe guitar solo. And then it segues into the Slide Down the Cellar Door. And my character reappears after I open the record. I close the record. And it's interesting. The record, like I told you, starts the day after my character dies. And the record ends on the day my character dies. So it's my character / me contemplating what's next and what is out there. And do we just go to sleep? Is it a dream? Is it a nightmare? We don't know. And then the Slide Down the Cellar Door, the whole idea of cellar door. I don't know if you've ever heard of the legend of cellar door. Is supposed to be the prettiest sounding combination of words in the English language. And I remember at university, probably English Lit 101, right? The intro course to English Lit. I remember a professor saying that cellar door was this thing, right? That E.B. White and E. Cummings and Tolkien and that whole crowd were saying that cellar door was this beautiful phrase, and I didn't understand it. I don't know, maybe it was the New England accent, cellar door. That's not very poetic to me. But again, I wrote it down in my notebook, and always thought someday I would revisit the whole concept of cellar door. And it dawned on me that it has to be said in almost a French way, cellar door, instead of cellar door, right? Or cellar door. It doesn't work unless it's cellar door. So I did my research. I did a lot of research for this project, John. I became a knowledgeable P.T. Barnum fan, and I had already known an awful lot about Thomas Wolfe, the artist Alexander Calder, who was the inventor of the original Circus of Wire dolls, a sculptor, an American sculptor. So I did all of this historical stuff. So there was a song at the turn of the 20th century that was a big hit that was called Slide Down the Cellar Door. And really that's just talking about the end of innocence, right? Children sliding down the cellar door was a game that they played, and we're never going to be able to recapture that. We're never be able to get back home again, which is again a Thomas Wolfe thing to say. But I leave it with a little bit of hope at the end, right? Because we change the last word from slide down the cellar door, nevermore, and then forevermore is the last one, to maybe give it a little bit of hope. So that's lyrically and musically, that's where that comes from. There's a lot of Abbey Road piano on the second half, the cellar door part. Noel comes in, Noel's character sings, Justin's character sings. Yeah, so that's, and it's funny, in the day and age of streaming, I can see what people are listening to, and really lucky that people are listening to the record. But the tracks that later on in the record are the ones with the lowest track count, the play count. And it's too bad, because that Coda is my favorite song on the record, and a lot of people aren't finding it.
So what's the plan? What's the plan to take this on the road?
Yeah, so the band is rehearsing. We're currently rehearsing, which is really cool. I get mad at myself for some of the complex moments, because now I've got to play them live. So the plan is we will do a show somewhere here in New England in March, and then we go to England, back to our home away from home is Trading Boundaries in Sussex, and we will play 2 shows, March 17th and 18th of 2023. And we're going to make it a big event. It'll be a weekend of shows, and like I mentioned, Amy Burks is going to join us, and John Hackett is going to join us, and Noel is going to join us, and I'm hoping that Tim will join us, and maybe some other special guests. But so the Saturday of the shows will be kind of an all-day event. Amy will do a solo set, Noel will do a solo set, John will do a solo set. I think Dave Henschel is going to be there as well, maybe to host a conversation about Small Creep with Noel. And then we'll probably play a couple of Small Creep songs and a couple of Ant songs as well, and just make it, we're trying to figure out. Michael Clifford is the owner or the co-owner of Trading Boundaries, and he's my accomplice in crime with these projects. And he's just as optimistic and naive as me that we can make this a success. But we were able to make the Ant Phillips things a success. So it's going to be kind of the rock and roll circus of wire dolls, almost like a little mini festival is the plan.
Is David Henschel semi-retired? I haven't talked to him in probably 2-3 years, but what's he up to?
Yeah, that's a good question. The last time I was in, and I wasn't in touch, I was in the room while Michael was on the phone with him. That was in May. I don't know. All I know is I have a huge amount of respect for the man's work. And, I got to meet him in 2019. He was at the Ant Phillips tribute shows, and I love the work that he's done, and I think those Genesis records that he did, I think they're the best sounding Genesis records. Some people might disagree, but I think all of them, Trick of the Tail, Wind and Wuthering, and Duke. I think Duke sounds so good. And then they made a sonic shift after that. And when Hugh Padgham came in, I think that was a conscious decision, right? But I think it's, my production on Circus of Wire Dolls was definitely trying to get the warmth and fullness of records like Small Creep and Duke.
And then there were 3 to me sorry to interrupt you, but then there were 3. There was just something about the bottom end of it. There was just, because it's the bass or lack thereof. There was just something about, and don't get me wrong, that's the first Genesis album I ever bought. I'd heard Genesis before, but that was the first one. And I remember thinking something's not right. And I asked him, was that conscious? And he says it was very conscious. But he says, you're learning all the time. You were talking about music knowledge a while ago. Music's all about, I don't know what I don't know. That's music.
Right.
That's music for me. It's not just the guy who's recording his first album and he doesn't know what he doesn't know. There's so much to it. It's never ending.
Yeah, that's right. No, that's right. And, there was a reason I skipped, and then there were 3, right? Because I don't think that sounds as good as Trick of the Tail, Wind and Wuthering, and Duke, right? So I think those records, I like all 3 of those records better than, and then there were 3. musically and songwriting wise too. But I think Duke is probably my favorite sounding Genesis record.
Duke
And
is one of my favorite Genesis albums, period.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, me too. And I don't think they got back to that warmth until the end when they did, the We Can't Dance record, which to me felt more like Duke than anything had in between.
By the way, I'm doing a special on Canadian music. Are there any Canadian, you don't have to answer, is there any Canadian musicians that stand out that you love, that you grew up listening to? Anybody?
Prism.
Oh. That I don't think any Americans mentioned Prism because they weren't that big in Ron Tabak, their vocalist, their first, not Henry Small who replaced him, who's an American, but yeah. Ron Tabak, I mean, that he just had the most, no one sounded like him.
Yeah, so I would say Prism and Honeymoon Suite. Love Honeymoon Suite.
Good driving music, man.
Yeah, no, those I don't know how many records they did after those first two, but those first two records were such classics. April Wine is another record, another band that
links to Brian Coombes, Rocking Horse Music, and Circus of Wire Dolls in the description. I'm John Beaudin. Make sure you comment on our videos, subscribe to our channel, and share our videos. This is Rock History Book.